So I'm so thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Niobe Way, professor of developmental psychology at NYU, the founder of the Project for the Advancement of Our Common Humanity, PAC, co-founder of Agape Kids, and the PI on the Listening Project. Dr. Way was the president of the Society for Research on Adolescence, received her BA from UC Berkeley, her doctoral from Harvard, and was an NIMH postdoctoral fellow at Yale. Dr. Niobe Way has spent nearly 40 years conducting empirical studies with teenagers, particularly boys and young men from diverse backgrounds. Her social science research, which focuses on social and emotional development and how cultural ideologies shape child development, has made her a go-to expert on friendship, loneliness, teenagers, gender stereotypes, masculinity, and the roots of violence. In her pioneering new book, Rebels with a Cause, Reimagining Boys, Ourselves, and Our Culture, which came out in July, Way draws a direct line from her subject's insights and suffering to a much wider crisis that is impacting us all, but is in our power to change. Rates of depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicide are soaring, particularly among young people. Mass violence seems almost commonplace, and virtually all of it is committed by young men between the ages of 18 and 25. I do want to mention that her latest book, which is not quite finished, is Our Social Nature in an Anti-Nature Culture. Is that correct?
Our social nature in an antisocial culture, a five-part story.
That's exactly what I meant. And I really want to talk to you about your last book, Rebels with a Cause, Reimagining Boys, Ourselves, and Our Culture. Why that title?
Okay, great. Well, thank you, first of all, Shari, for inviting me. I've known about your work, your narrative method, for a really long time. So it's just really nice to actually be here with you and with everybody as new people in my world. So I'm a developmental psychologist, and I do that, which means I study children and young people, and then I follow them over time. So what I'm about to share with you are things that uh, listening to young people. I've been listening to teenagers since 1987, so almost 40 years. And I do these longitudinal studies where they tell me stories about different questions I have. And so Rebels with a Cause is focused on hundreds of, particularly the stories on boys and young men, although I focus on all sorts of teenagers, regardless of identities. But in this one, it's mostly boys and young men, mostly boys and young men of color from working class communities, and they teach us a story about who we are, who they are, but also who we are as human, and what's getting in the way of our capacity to act like a human and leading to a crisis of connection, which I'll talk about what that means, and the solutions. And so Rebels with a Cause really teaches us, it's a book about summarizing what I've learned over 40 years of listening to thousands and thousands of boys and young men followed over time. So I usually follow them about 4 or 5 years through adolescence. And they teach us four things that have relevance today and even have relevance to the recent election. So they teach us, number one, when you listen to boys at 11 and 12 years old, 13 years old, they talk about their desire for close friendships, that they want close friendships, they want emotionally intimate friendships, just like girls do, that basically boys and girls and non-gender conforming kids all essentially are starving for close friendships, and boys as well want friendships in which they can share their deep secrets and not be laughed at when they're feeling vulnerable. And I've been hearing this from thousands of boys around the world at this point. And then what happens is as they talk about the link between their friendships and their mental health. So if they don't have these friendships, they suffer mentally. And they say, if I don't have someone to talk to share my feelings, I will go wacko. I'll want to kill myself. I will be all alone and want to die. And I've been hearing that since 1988. So the idea is that it's mental health is not the problem in our country. It's a crisis of connection, a disconnection from ourselves and each other that leads to a mental health crisis, which is what Boyd's been telling us for decades. This third thing, so one is that wanting friendships, two is that it's important to have these close friendships for their mental health and for our mental health. And then the third finding is that as boys get older, and the pressures to man up and the pressures to accommodate to a culture that only values our hard side, which is our independence and autonomy, and doesn't value connection and relationships and emotional sensitivity, that boys go through what I call a crisis of connection. And in fact, that's what you're seeing around the world, is that everybody's facing a crisis of connection, increasingly disconnected from ourselves and each other, not seeing our own humanity and not seeing the humanity of other people. And the idea is that crisis of connection has consequences, which is the fourth theme, which is violence. Suicide and violence are the consequences of a crisis of connection. And the solution is to literally do what Shari's doing with you, which is to foster our relational intelligence, our capacity for close relationships, our capacity to be connected to ourselves and each other. And that's the solution that young people have been asking us to do. Pay attention, adults. That they want that and they need that to thrive, and we're not listening as a culture, and certainly not as an adult culture. So rebels with the cause that they have, young people in this case, boys and young men, the cause that they have is to care. They want a culture that actually cares. And they very much hear and they talk about, we live in a culture where I don't care is a common thing. You're not supposed to care about what other people think and feel. You're supposed to just be me, and care about only what you feel, not how other people may feel. So they want us to care not only about them, but also about each other. They want us to value the friendships. We're not a culture that values friendships. We privilege romantic relationships over friendships. They want us to value their friendships and our friendships. They want us to also take responsibility for raising them in a culture to go against their nature, because we don't value their hard and soft sides. We just value their hard sides. So they want us to take responsibility for the damage we've done to many, many young people in the way we raise our children. And then also to act on that responsibility, to create opportunities to have the relationships that they're so starving for. And so that's why I say rebels with a cause, that's the cause. Reimagining boys, not seeing them as just a stereotype boy with just a hard side, but they have a hard and soft side, just like all humans. So it's reimagining boys ourselves. We also, regardless of our gender identities, we want connection and we want independence, both at the same time. We think and feel. We don't just think or feel. So humans, right? We need to reimagine ourselves as fully human, not as half human. And then reimagining our culture that actually values our nature. So we are living currently, which is what my new book's about, is that we actually live in a culture that clashes with our nature. And that in fact causes our problems. So the idea, and it makes us do things that are actually inconsistent with what we know is good and righteous. And so the idea is to actually listen to young people and learn from them about the root of our problems and their problems and how to solve it together. So that's very quickly summarizing. And if you want to know more about it, should I put it in Olivia, should I just put it in here?
Go for it.
There's a book website and you can check it out. It's gotten a lot of press and you can read about the press and whatever you want if you want to know more about it or get the book. So it's Niobe way.com.
Wow. Well, you see, so everything that you're passionate about has been incredibly inspiring to me, because the narrative method is a response to what I call the cult of culture. This thing that gets us the moment we're put in front of a cartoon, where we very early learn that we're not good enough, none of us. And it grows from there to we get to the point as we are now, where even though we may want to write or express ourselves in another creative format, we have fear, of course, because we have memories of times that we were laughed at or treated cruelly. Niobe, do you think in the culture, as it has gone out of whack at this point, there can ever be a common conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you why. So in my book, I call it, I'm going to be very careful what I'm saying here because I don't want you to misinterpret me. I call the culture we live in boy culture, boy in quotations, because it's not a real boy. Because remember, I'm learning from real boys. It's a stereotype. It's a cartoon character of a boy who only values his hard side and doesn't value his soft side. And what boys teach us is they value both sides. They have extraordinary emotional sensitivity, extraordinary emotional relational intelligence, and we're not hearing it. And then we're stereotyping that they're not even interested in those kind of intimacy that girls and women are. So boy culture is actually getting in the way of all of us, because now what we're finding, and this is the most depressing thing we're finding, girls and women are now more likely to adhere to so-called norms of masculinity than boys and men. because they've gotten the message that if they just emphasize their hard side, their STEM side, and not their poetry side, or their interest in hard sciences, not in soft sciences, I could go on and on, thinking versus feeling, that they'll get their foot in the door. So we have an entire culture that premises on boy culture. But this boy culture of ours, however, is not natural to us. And that's why I'm totally optimistic, because what we learned from listening to 4- and 5-year-olds is we actually have the natural capacity to look at each other with wonder, that's one of the words today, and with curiosity about what we can learn about me from you, what we can learn about each other, but also what I can learn about me from you, from listening to your experiences. So we have natural relational intelligence, natural curiosity, a curiosity about each other that's natural to us. So the solution to disrupt boy culture is actually to connect to who we are naturally, which is deeply, deeply intelligent, relationally intelligent, emotionally intelligent. And so we have to remind ourselves that we have as I always say to all parents, we have already the capacity within us naturally to solve our own problems. And so now we need to start doing it and nurturing it in others so that we can disrupt a culture that's causing all the craziness and making us disconnected from our own humanity.
Thank you. And thy will be done.